the Martinus Cosmology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the thoughts and ideas of the Danish writer Martinus. My name is Mary McGovern, and I'm your host for today. And I'm recording from the Martinus Centre in Klint in Denmark, where we are approaching the end of the first of 2 international weeks. And I'm very happy to welcome as my guest today Karin Jansson from Sweden, who's been running one of the 2 English groups this week. Welcome, Karin.
Thank you very much.
And Karin, you gave a lecture during the week in Swedish entitled Forgiveness as a Science and the Art of Living. And I thought that would be a good topic for our discussion today. Perhaps we could start by me asking you, what does forgiveness really mean? What is forgiveness?
Yeah, it's good to start off with that, because I think that many people today, they have they don't really understand what forgiveness means. Some people think that it might be a sign of weakness, for example, that you forgive. And in our society today, we always look for scapegoats. We look for the one to blame for something. And then quite often we sort of take that person away, and then everything should be okay again. So the concept of forgiveness is not so popular today. But still, also psychologists, they know that if you're carrying non-forgiveness, if you're just bitter and you're resenting something and so on, that means that you will actually get ill, and it's not very good for your health. So when we are talking about forgiveness from a Martinus point of view, then we mean accepting the person, not necessarily accepting the act or what caused the problem and so on, because you might have been abused or you might have been through very difficult things. And forgiving doesn't mean that you're accepting that someone is doing that to you, or that that person might do it again. Absolutely not. But it is forgiving the person, because otherwise you are sort of stuck in this bitterness, and it's not really good for you.
And you see a lot of people who feel they're victims. Martinus talks about victim consciousness. That seems to be something that makes people ill. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I think it's very common today that people feel that they are the victims of something or someone. You could be the victim of society, or you could be the victim of your parents or your husband hitting you, or whatever it is. And of course, from the kind of perspective that we have today, it looks like that. It looks like it was the other person who caused it. But from a Martinus point of view, we know that that's not the whole answer. Everything that you meet is actually a reflection of yourself. So it means that you have done something similar in the past, and people are sort of bringing it. You are meeting the postman with a letter. It's not really a nice letter always, but it doesn't really help not to be angry with the postman. So, but of course, from the perspective people have, it looks like you are the victim. And people really want to stress that today also.
They do? They want to stress that they are victims?
Yeah, and they say, okay, I'm like this because, well, this happened in my childhood, and I can't be anything else that I am because this thing happened. So it's not really good for you to get stuck in those kind of thoughts, I think.
And of course it's true from a one-life perspective that these things happened, and your mother did this, your father did this, the war did something else, and so on. But Martinus has a larger perspective. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course. Martinus, he talks about the laws of life, and he explains why we meet different things in our lives. And of course there are many things that we have to understand. But basically we could say that there is nothing wrong in the universe. Everything has a purpose. So, and as I said before, what we meet is always something that we have done ourselves before. So it's the law of karma. We sow and we reap. So you could say that it's a very logical universe, which brings back to us the energy that we are sending out. And of course, if I have killed someone and then I'm getting a harsh thing back towards me and I'm meeting it in the same way, then of course I'm just sending out the same karma over and over again. So the only way of putting an end to this bad karma or negative karma is actually to forgive. It's to start a new process.
And forgiveness, I guess it includes trying to understand why you're receiving that kind of karma. Both receiving it, both understanding it from your own point of view, what you yourself perhaps have sent out, and that can be very hard to work out if you get some kind of illness or you're treated badly by your partner, whatever. It can be hard to work out what have I done to deserve this, but also to understand the other person who's involved.
Of course, it can be very difficult, and it can be impossible to know exactly what you have done yourself, because it might be in your previous life. So, of course, you don't know exactly. But Martinus says that if karma hits you, then it is actually because you could still do something of the same kind. You could cause the same kind of pain in another person that is now that you have suffered yourself. So, of course, it means that there is something in your consciousness. And you have to look for that, and you have to look for similar situations in your own life. Maybe you are not treating your husband in that way, but maybe you're treating your kids or an animal. And Martinus, he has this much more broader view on karma. It's not only about people. We also have to think about how we are treating our bodies. And, for example, if we are not eating right food, we are drinking alcohol, taking drugs, and so on, that might also cause illness in us. And he's also talking about the whole of the universe, how we're treating nature, the environment, and so on. So there are so many ways that these laws of karma are functioning. And, of course, we cannot always know the exact details, but we can know that it's a reflection of myself. It's I can work on it, but it's no idea to blame other people, because we cannot really make them change, but we can change ourselves.
I think too that we see that lifestyle medicine is evolving. There are a lot of doctors and researchers working on lifestyle medicine and recommending plant-based food and no alcohol and so on for the sake of health. Of course, they don't have this microcosmic perspective that Martinus has about our microcosmos being alive. But I think we see this. There is a development within science that's helping us to take responsibility for the animals, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And Martinus also tells us that as long as we are eating meat, we are not really protected from accidents and so on. So, I mean, if you still eat meat, it means that you are sort of involved in killing animals, and karma for that could be, for example, that you get killed or hurt in a car accident or something like that. So of course, people normally don't put these things together. They don't really understand what is happening. But actually, quite a lot of the bad things going on this planet right now could be because of meat eating. That could also be the reason why some people are hurt or killed in wars and so on.
Because we see hundreds and thousands of people being killed in wars, and you can ask yourself why. What have they done to deserve this? Small children, and of course they've had many lives before this one, so it's hard to see what the exact cause of things is. But there's a larger connection. One of the things you said in your lecture was that forgiveness isn't particularly popular. Would you like to expand on that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we are at a time where, I mean, the old concept of forgiveness, it's so much connected to Christianity. And in Christianity, you couldn't give a logic explanation why you should forgive. It was just a feeling that it was good, and Jesus told you to forgive and so on. But nowadays, people are so much more intelligent and intellectual beings. They want to know, why should I forgive? It doesn't help me. What's in it for me? So I think it's you lack an explanation for why it is good for you. But actually also, as I said in the beginning, psychologists and so on today, they can also see that it is good for you. And I mean, there is research that shows that especially if you're keeping the anger towards people, if you're carrying around anger, that could, for example, give illnesses in your heart and your blood system. And that is exactly what Martinus says as well.
So how do we forgive? How can you forgive? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, it's actually something that we have to work on, and we have to use both our logic and our feelings to do this. And it's actually, it might be two separate things to work on. But from a Martinus point of view, we could start to understand our development and evolution. And of course, we know that every person has its own experiences, and it goes through life, it goes through all the different lives and have all these experiences. And of course, where we are right now, nobody else is exactly at the same point. So I am who I am because everything I've been through, and that is actually the same with everybody else. But it means that when I say something, other people might not agree with it, and it's absolutely fine. We can't have the same opinions, we can't be the same because we haven't been through the same. But that, sometimes you get very angry with people because they don't understand you, or you have different views on how to bring up your kids or politics and all kinds of things. And you might not be able to forgive other people. But nobody's wrong. Actually, everybody is right, because it's right out of what you have experienced. So when you start to understand this, that what people think is actually logic from their point of view, then you can start accepting them. And of course people would say, well, but you can't accept Hitler or people like that. Well, actually you can. There is also logic behind Hitler and other people who have murdered and all kinds of criminals. There is a reason for them being at that point. So, of course, understanding evolution and understanding that there is no other way that they can be, that's a good starting point. But actually, you can also use that on yourself, because forgiveness is not only about other people, it's very much about yourself. And quite often you cannot forgive yourself because you are not good enough, you haven't achieved the things you wanted to, and there are lots of things that you would like to be, but you haven't managed. And as you don't know what you have been through, you cannot really understand why can't I achieve that? It seems quite simple. I could do this. My friend could do this and that, but I can't. Mm. So all of this can be very frustrating, and you can be very angry with yourself. So I said before that we are carrying anger towards other people, but quite often we are also carrying anger inside ourselves, towards ourselves. And that can be very, very, it can be a disaster in our body, Martinus says. So it's very important to start off with understanding evolution.
Yeah, and you often meet the comment that, well, if I can do it, you can do it. Yeah. As if we have the same past and we have the same experiences. Mm-hmm. So if something is easy for you, it ought to be easy for me. But we have our different talents, our different backgrounds. We've experienced different things in this life and in all the previous lives. So we don't have the same preconditions. So we have, at the moment, false expectations of one another.
Yeah, and I could also add on that I think that we must forgive ourselves, and a good way of doing that is to start off by trying to be thankful for all the talents you have. Quite often you don't notice all the things you have. It's the things you don't have or don't do or things you are not good at that you are sort of being angry with yourself. But instead we could be thankful for the ones we are and for everything we can do. And by doing that, we are actually releasing our forces inside ourselves, because then these talents can really start to bloom. So it's very important to be thankful, and then we might not be so angry with the things that we don't do, because we see that there are so many things we can.
So we achieve a balanced view of ourselves, perhaps. I think Martinus says something about that in the little book, The Road to Initiation, that true humility is this balanced view. So you're not arrogant about yourself, but you're not overly humble so that you criticize yourself, so to speak. But you have a balanced view of, you see people who can do things, who are more advanced than you are yourself, but you can see that you're not the worst and you're not the best. You're somewhere on a chain of evolution. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we are talking about evolution, we also have to accept our fate. We have to accept what we have been through, the good and the bad things. And Martinus talks about carrying the cross, and so that we are not dissatisfied with the lives we have. It's actually for a purpose that we go through both good and evil, and we can be very thankful for that. So the more we train this, the more we can feel gratitude even when some bad things are happening. And even if it doesn't feel like that in the beginning, we can start saying, okay, I'm glad this happened to me. Now let's see what I can learn from it. Mm. And in that way, we create a totally different atmosphere within ourselves. And of course, our micro-beings, they are not hurt so much in that way.
I had a friend who was very seriously ill with cancer, but his daily practice I found very inspiring, and that was to thank life for everything he could think of thanking for. And it was such an inspiration for me, and I think it's carried him through to the end, really. Just this daily practice of being grateful. It was very inspiring.
Yeah, and I know psychologists also work with this, because being grateful, just as you said, for small things in your daily life, it actually can relieve you from depression and anxiety and so on. Because you can't have thankfulness and gratitude at the same time as you are depressed. It's sort of different energies. So it's interesting that you don't have to fight depression. You can just bring gratitude instead into your life.
You talked in your lecture about two ways of forgiving, with your brain and with your heart. I wonder if you would elaborate on the difference between those two things.
Yeah, of course, the best thing is that we can forgive because we understand why we should forgive, and we also feel forgiveness with our hearts. I mean that you feel a warm feeling towards that person. So forgiveness is really also thinking that hopefully this person will have a good life, and it's not just something from the brain. But Martinus also says that this is very difficult. It's difficult to get to the point where you really feel that you can forgive someone. And actually it's a good starting point, he says, to start with an intellectual forgiveness, where you can start to think, well, the person is doing its best. I understand that this is that he or she is on her way in evolution. And, well, you go through the different things we talked about before, which are the cosmic laws that Martinus has given to us or explained to us. So if we start to understand these laws, we can quite fast understand, okay, my goal is to forgive this person. So this is a starting point. And then gradually, if you work with it, sometimes you have to work with it for years, actually, to get to a point where you also from your heart can forgive that person. But you can always train, you can try and send light and loving thoughts, you can pray, you can also ask in your prayer, how can I forgive this person? And then you might also get some lessons from life about that. So it is a process, but as Martinus also says that forgiveness, it's also a scientific way, you could say, in life. So you have to work with it. You have to take it seriously. It's not something that you can go around and you could get to cosmic consciousness without learning to forgive. It's not possible.
And you say it's scientific. You could even experiment with it. You could try forgiving and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. That's also very interesting. And many people also have said that if they had problems, for example, with someone at work and they start praying for that person, they start forgiving, quite often they will notice that, whatever the problem was, it will just disappear. Suddenly it's not there because the atmosphere of non-forgiveness is not there.
Yes, I've experienced that myself, working theoretically on forgiving someone and then suddenly noticing, well, there's no problem anymore. And I did this consistent experiment of trying to forgive a particular person theoretically, because I couldn't do it with my heart. But suddenly there wasn't any problem anymore. But it took a conscious effort on my part.
Yeah, and of course, if we pray for help and we try and forgive and so on, of course we will also get help from Providence and so on. So there will be, our guardian angels or other beings helping us to so that this kind of atmosphere that there was, it will be taken away. So we get a lot of help if we just start the process, I think.
And I guess most of us have a lot of situations to work on. One of the goals of Martinus's world picture is to support us on our journey towards being all-loving, 100% of the time, to everybody and everything. But what is love, actually, and does forgiveness play a part in love?
Yeah, of course. You could say that forgiveness is a foundation of love, because how could you love someone if you're not forgiving them? So forgiveness means accepting and understanding and actually being close to a person. And it is difficult to understand what is love, really. And Martinus says at one point that we all want to be united with life. So every living being wants to be united with other living beings. We want to have this union, and that is what we experience through life. So right now where we live, we have this feeling of being separated from God, being separated from each other. We think that we are separate beings. But we can understand from Martinus's symbols that our eyes are all connected, and we are sort of all connected to God, and we are always very close to God. Actually, there is no distance between us, he says. So just at this part of our evolution, we feel the separation and loneliness, and that is very painful for us. So what we are really longing for is to be united, and that is really to feel love, to be together with everything and everybody. And as long as we are not forgiving each other, of course we feel separated more and more. And I think that's really a big problem also today, because in the past we were more ruled by instinct, and we had families, we had different villages, tribes and so on, where people had the feeling of being together. They felt they belonged to something. And nowadays we have this society of individualism, and you are supposed to take care of yourself and be a strong person in yourself. But of course we can be that, but there is also another side of us. We need each other. And because of that, we also need to forgive each other. Otherwise, we cannot get close.
We see in today's culture a lot of crime, and we see wars and people doing very evil things towards one another. And some people might object to the idea of forgiveness and say, well, this murderer, he should just be put in prison, or he should be executed, or let's just get rid of him. So how do you marry the idea of forgiveness and neighborly love with criminality and the need to protect society from criminal acts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, this is a very difficult question, because on one hand you could say that, as we said before, even Hitler can be forgiven because he's just doing what he's supposed to do. And it goes the same with all criminals. But the problem here is that from Martinus we can understand that people are at different levels. And being a criminal could be the right thing at one level, but mostly people in our society, they think that you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't rob each other, and so on, because we have reached that level. And then there are still some people who belong to other steps in evolution, and for them it doesn't feel wrong to do this thing. Actually, it feels right. And they can see all the richness here in the world, and they think, I can take it. And then, of course, people would say, you can't just forgive them. You can't just let them walk on the street and rob you and so on. And Martinus says, yes, that's true. You can forgive them because they are just exactly what they are meant to be, but they cannot be in our society. Okay, then, should we lock them up in prisons and punish them? No, says Martinus, it's not a question of punishment. We don't have to punish anyone because, karma brings energy back, so life itself will teach people what they need to learn. So we never have to think that we have to punish, not our kids, not anyone that we meet. But here Martinus suggests that we can form, as he calls it, junior societies where these people can live. So it's just a normal society where people who are not really that evolved can stay for a while until they can really get out into the normal world. And in a way you could say that the prisons we have in Scandinavia, they are a little bit like this, because they are quite nice. You can study, you can work, you can have quite a good life at the prison, but still, of course, you're not allowed to go out of it. And in the future, these societies will be much bigger, of course, so that you can live there, you can have a family, you can have a normal life, but still you are not probably allowed to go to other places. So that is the way he tries to solve that problem, that for quite some time, I guess, we will have people at different levels. And in the future, of course, these people, they can get the best of education and they can get psychological help and lots of things that they can't get today. So probably they will be able to evolve. So it's more like taking care of these people in a good way than punishing them.
And in a way, you could say that punishing them brings the punisher down to the level of the criminal.
Yeah, exactly. So it also shows, we are showing who we are when we try to punish other people. But it's also, it's from the Bible, from the Old Testament and so on. They had the worldview that God was punishing, and you thought that this is the way you should do. And, even today people hit their kids and think that that's the only way that you can teach kids to behave in a good way and so on. But also here we can see in many countries it's forbidden today, so things are happening.
So do you have any final advice for anyone who's sitting in a situation where they've been hurt by someone or hurt by a situation and they're stuck in non-forgiveness? Martinus describes non-forgiveness as a very hard burden, very heavy burden to bear. Have you got any words of comfort or support?
Yeah, it is interesting that he's talking about non-forgiveness, and he says, like you said, that it's a burden, and it actually keeps you on a lower level of evolution. So it means that you won't get into contact with so much light and love if you're carrying this non-forgiveness. So actually, he says when we are forgiving, it's like a burden we are throwing away. And in that way, we can also lift ourselves to a higher level of evolution. So, of course, when we start to work on forgiveness, we will also experience more light and love in our lives. So it actually pays to forgive, we could say.
Martinus said at one point that his whole task on earth was to help us see that it pays to be good. So maybe that's an appropriate place to stop. Thank you very much, Karin Jansson, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.